Hi guys, just wanted to talk a little bit, make a quick video about free verse and metered verse. Wow, the anti-flicker is going kind of crazy, but see how that pans out. It's my white shirt, just making it dance. But whew. Okay, so this will be a trippy video, but yeah, you know, people sometimes reach out to me and say, hey, what should I do? I'm starting out. Should I write in free verse? Should I write in metered forms? What's important? When I'm writing free verse, should I just totally let everything loose? Or, what should I do? And, there's a lot of different approaches here, certainly for probably, a couple of generations at least. Most people starting out probably have mainly written in free verse. Maybe if they were writing, and they didn't know, they wrote some stuff that rhymed. Maybe because that's what you hear on the radio, or you listen to hip hop, and you want to get that type of style in your stuff, or you hear spoken word, and you put that type of feeling into it, that type of rhythm. But for the most part, I think free verse pretty much dominates the landscape, and the idea that people are going to be able to sit down and write kind of a traditional iambic pentameter line, or iambic tetrameter is just probably not super likely anymore. That being said, there's nothing wrong with doing that, and I think could be a great way to improve. But I think most people are probably going to start in a free verse paradigm and then work towards that. And if you think about that, it's kind of very unusual, right? So for most of the time of poetry, with some notable exceptions, people probably did write in some type of form, metered form or another. And, we've talked about the origins of poetry going back to lyric, at least, having some type of pattern where an instrument could accompany it. That's probably a pretty long-lasting tradition. Certainly there have been, free verse. There's biblical free verse. So the Hebrew Torah is largely written in a free verse style. And that supposedly influenced Walt Whitman, who, that's late 19th century, mid to late 19th century writer, considered the father of American free verse. So he's probably influenced by these biblical cadences and wanted a new way to approach his subject matter. But that didn't necessarily stick. It wasn't like, and then everyone was, after Walt Whitman, was like, okay, well, we'll just write in free verse. I think it was probably French surrealism, people like Apollinaire and Rimbaud, that then filtered back through, people like Ezra Pound, who were great proponents, or Marion Moore, William Carlos Williams, who were great proponents of free verse as this alternative approach. And they were radically, to a certain extent, to varying degrees, but certainly William Carlos Williams was anti-form, anti-meter. He really didn't like it and thought it was holding back the development of poetry. He attacked Auden, who was an expert of metrical poetry, for kind of keeping that up. So I think today it's a little bit more relaxed. I think you can write in both. You can write some free verse, you can write some formal verse, and a lot of poets do a little bit of both. Some seem to do better in one than the other, but I don't think there's any rules. I mean, I think you can submit to many journals, and they'd be happy, if you mix some free verse and some metrical stuff. It's not going to bother them. There's some very few journals out there which will only take metrical, or formal work, but that's relatively unusual. There just aren't that many of them that really are focused on that. But a lot of journals would still be open to that type to metrical work, if that's your preference. There's still a lot of journals that are happy to publish that, and I find formal poetry coming up in all sorts of surprising places. So if that's your preference to work in that way, it's certainly very, very possible to do so. Now, I think when I'm just like cruising around OC Poetry on Reddit, and I read stuff in metrical or rhyming stuff, it's often you know, it's often hard. It's challenging, and it takes a while before you can kind of get to skill at finding rhymes without forcing them, and looking for a lot of synonyms for words and a lot of possible rhyme words for each synonym, so you get enough possibilities out there. And maybe you use some slant rhyme, and you use subtle rhyme schemes where instead of just doing couplets like A B B C C, you do quatrains like A B D C, or A B A B, or something like that. And there's all sorts, tetrarema. There's all sorts of rhyme schemes out there that can help you vary things and make the rhyme seem less forced than just like jamming couplets down people's throats. So that's sometimes an issue, and especially when you end up rhyming things like monk or drunk, and like I don't know. Say and day, or just kind of obvious rhymes, bright and light, or death and breath. These things that pretty much have been done a lot, and seem like the reader might see them coming. When poets choose those types of rhymes, sometimes they could work, but sometimes it ends up almost kind of hitting people across the face with your rhymes, and maybe that's not the goal. Also, I feel like it's underappreciated to just write in meter without necessarily rhyming. You could write in blank verse, for example, and have a lot of success with that, with just an iambic, pentameter line, without needing them to rhyme. I mean, I think people think like formal poetry always means rhyming, and there's other ways to do. You could do syllabic verse, and syllabic verse means just counting the number of syllables, like in haiku. But there's a lot of other syllabic ways you could go that potentially very subtle and very interesting effects. And use of enjambment. All these things apply to free verse as well. I think that's the other thing. People are like, well, free verse. Free means you can do whatever you want. It's like, well, no. When you actually start to read a lot of contemporary published poetry, you start to see the free verse itself has its own kind of rules and expectations, and like it's better at some things and weaker at other things. So free verse really tends to demand a very high degree of attenuation or economy. Like if you employ a lot of adjectival stuff in your poetry, free verse, it's kind of really punishing in free verse. It looks really bad to just have a lot of adjectives and adverbs in a poem. It just ends up looking weak. You need strong images in free verse, and you need to introduce those images quickly. You can't have a lot of dialogue. Typically, it's hard to kind of set things up in this kind of prosy kind of narrative. And then, and next week, and after that, and we went back, and it was gone, and those types of things. All it's kind of difficult free verse today. I'm not saying it always has to be this way. I'm saying in general, it tends to be a kind of lyric present tense. Is the most common free verse. I mean, this ties into a bigger question. People are going to say, like, well, if everybody's doing it this way, right? Why don't I do something different? Then I'll be creative and different. If I do things different than what everyone else is doing, won't that make me special and unique? And that'll make it more easy for me to get recognized and published. Well, that's a great idea. It's a great idea, right? Unfortunately, if you don't read the stuff out there and understand why people are approaching it this way, what problems they're solving by writing in the present tense, what problems are they solving by avoiding too many adjectives, what problems are they solving by introducing fresh, immediate imagery. If you don't understand that, you can't transcend it. You can't break the mold. So if you guys want to figure out like how you can do things differently, maybe you're a genius. Maybe you're just going to be that person who just rolls out and you don't need to understand any of the conventions. But it's unlikely for most of us, most of the time, for us to get to that stage in mastery where you can break convention. First, you have to understand convention. And then you can try to surpass it. So again, I think studying metrical poetry can accelerate your kind of time to mastery. So I try, when I'm stalled and I don't have some good ideas for a new poem, I'll try to work in form. I'll work on a sonnet, or work on quatrains, or work on tetrameter, or I'll play around, or I'll revise the sestina again, or whatever it is. By pushing, maybe I'll even do some syllabics. By trying to push myself, I can make sure that I'm always sharpening my skill set, as opposed to sitting on my hands and waiting for a publisher to get back to me, or whatever it is, or for inspiration to strike. It's better to have some things to work on and to move forward. I think metrical verse has an incredible value there, where sometimes with free verse, you write something, you fall in love with it, you're like, oh, I love this free verse poem, I'm keeping it. And then you're reluctant to revise it as intently. While with metrical stuff, you're writing, let's say, you're trying to write a villanelle. Well, you're going to be revising that villanelle quite a bit. Like, you're going to go back and take many, many drafts of it, because it's inevitable. You're not going to get it right the first time. It's not going to work. The scheme is demanding. So poems with a demanding form require you to revise quite a bit. And that gets you in the habit of not assuming that the first thing you come up with is necessarily the finished product. You get much more comfortable with this process of refining and refining and refining. I think that's naturally going to make you stronger. So, don't be married to like, hey, I'm always going to write in free verse, or I'm always going to write in formal verse. And, study what other people are doing with it. Go back, maybe you do read some Walt Whitman. Maybe then you go on to read some William Carlos Williams, or, you read some stuff like that. Try to understand, or Hart Crane, or whatever it is, to try to understand, okay, what was this revolution that free verse, what problems were they trying to solve with the introduction of free verse? And I think you're gonna by reading more of that stuff and asking yourself those questions, like why was William Carlos Williams so against these received forms? I think that will ultimately make you stronger and more adept yourself. And then go back and see someone writing around the same time. Edna St. Vincent Millay wrote beautifully in form. And you could ask yourself, well, why? I mean, why was she so successful at writing in these forms when others weren't? Okay, just some things to think about. Thanks for joining me, and we'll talk soon, guys.